practices. So Geshe made a video about that, explaining a little bit about those principles and effective ways to kind of maximize those opportunities for the accumulation of merit. So that's the first video that will be uploaded. And then the second video, which is going to be uploaded on the Day of Miracles, I believe that is the 14th of March. So that video is Geshe-la's commentary on Avalokiteshvara's Om Mani Padme Hung mantra, with the meaning of that, as well as I think 2 or 3 different visualizations. So it's kind of more of a meditative practice that will be uploaded with that. I think that also on those holy days, we have a sutra recitation, Sutra of Golden Light, that is planned, and some other things as well. So do check out all of those activities. When Geshe and I come back, we will be starting back to the point where we started in this series of these essential texts of Indo-Tibetan Buddhism. So we'll be picking up where we left off in Zapato Rinpoche's Kunzang Lame Gelung, the words of my perfect teacher. So that is kind of the plan going forward. I see that we're actually 2 or 3 minutes after the hour. So I'll stop talking now. I'll invite Geshe down and we'll get started. Thanks so much for your patience, everyone. I can hear somebody's keyboard. I'm not sure who it is. Geshe was asking, why don't you get seated? I feel a bit weird when people are doing the prostrations and I'm seated there because they're for Geshe, obviously. So I usually like to wait until those are done. So welcome everybody, and I'm sorry, just one more thing before we get started. We're having like, well, Marjorie's used to this, but we haven't had it in a very long time, a massive snowfall, like really massive. So I went for a walk this morning and the power is off on one of the streets in our neighborhood, but so far our street is good. So I'm hoping for no problems, but if we conk out suddenly, you know why? It's not because we don't love you, it's because the power went out. So just by way of a warning, but I think we should be okay. And I saw that the crew is at the other street, so hopefully we'll be fine. That's okay.
Oh yeah,
so can you hear Geshe-la's voice okay? Great. So Tashi Dele, welcome to everyone. So Geshe-la hopes that you are all well and happy and that all of your activities, in particular your Dharma activities, are going well. So it's really important to always keep in mind, right? To always remember that with this human body, we have the perfect opportunity, the perfect basis to cultivate the Dharma very, very well. This is important to keep in mind.
that dise garuta dinimas in the touching with the yard. The Tangaroso Yabuchana, so Goga Yashu, this is a Cheshu Yabuchavis.
So then also in terms of the time, generally this is the time of Kali Yuga, or the time of degeneration. So that's one way of looking at it. But if you look at our particular situations, having this human rebirth, human body, and human facility, actually, it's a very excellent and important time for us.
That just a catchimbuta lila, just a lila washabayina, Quay Shavala, Candis Yinayo. Kota Page, Ramatomika, Nikachi Wayobayina, Gonzo Chilino, Lila Wayoyaris.
And really think about these kind of activities compared to the samsaric activities, because we see that the samsaric activities of this world, right? Initially, they might seem very kind of fun and captivating, but ultimately we come to a point where we get bored. We come to a point where we're dissatisfied. So, we look at the world today, we see, people with a fame and a power, they are, not necessarily happy. We see how kind of biases and attachment towards countries and so forth, that these cause conflicts all between us, right? But this, in a way, is just samsara, right? This is samsara. So our study and our practice, when we talk about our study and our practice, before we really get stabilized in that, so before we get stable in that, right, it's going to be a little bit difficult. And the way to get stable in that is through our study and knowledge. So once we know a little bit, what we'll find is that all of the time we can see things kind of like a play. We will find that we can always maintain a happy disposition. We will find that we will be able to remain relaxed. That's a Ale, loso. Kare lepa jonku di dawo chi. Ye de sepula. Yeah, so so then sorry, just a vocabulary problem from my side, right? Right from the beginning, I should have said. But anyways, if we look at the three seats, right? So the Ganden Sera Drepungol, but also if we look at a lot of the larger Tibetan monasteries of the various lineages, researchers are looking at the older monks there, and they're finding that there's a much lower incidence of cognitive decline, like dementia and things like that, right? There's a much lower instance of that. So why is that? So Geshe said it's not as if there's no problems at these monasteries. Like, let's be very clear on that. You go there and there's problems just like anywhere else. But it's through the application of the teachings that one is able to maintain a happier mind. One is able to maintain a more relaxed mind. And Geshe thinks that this may be the reason that there's a lower instance of cognitive decline. Yeah. So right now there's kind of research ongoing with this, and they're really trying to look deeply into the reasons of why there is this lower instance of Alzheimer's and age-related cognitive decline in these places.
니까고 되시 그거 하래라 될라 때네 다 그게 다 두게 되시 저 그거 하래.
And so to get back to our work, our task, right? We want this happiness. And so what we're trying to achieve is not just that temporary happiness, but also that ultimate happiness.
어다 될다 뭐 동번에서나 뭐들 다 가서 쪼쪼게 하들 가첨보 될라 예반주의 고시 야레스 가서 다 소소소 그녀도 어추르 돈에 다 여본도 그거 하래스.
And if you think about like, what is a first step that we can take to embark on that? That could bring us to a discussion of 4 points, which are known as the 4 doors to the accumulation of faults. The 4 doors to the accumulation of faults. And those are things that are important daily from day to day, right from when we're a beginner up until now.
내서 맛이 받으래서 개와도 디바도 어다 디가 리버지네서 맛이 받대 조지래서.
So the first of these 4 is, I would translate it as unknowingness. Unknowingness. You could also say lack of knowledge if you prefer. And this is an unknowingness about differentiating between virtue and non-virtue, thinking about what causes lead to what results, things like that. So within this first category of unknowingness, right, there's kind of like coarser manifestations of that. There's more subtle manifestations of that. We can understand that there's a lot of things that we need to know, a lot of knowledge we need to cultivate to overcome this. Also, in terms of the body, speech, and mind, we call these the 3 doors. So within this number 1 of the 4 doors, the 3 doors of body, speech, and mind, right? What are the things we need to know about those? Which activities of those 3 lead to virtue? Which activities of those 3 lead to what is unwholesome? So it's in order to understand all of this, right? This is a big part of the reason that, like now, we exert ourselves in studying and listening it so that we can come to understand those things that we did not know. So we understand that within body, speech, and mind, we can see body and speech as kind of like the branches, and mind as the main thing here. And if we understand that mind is the main thing, then it becomes very important, right? Which ways of thinking should we cultivate, and which ways of thinking should we diminish or abandon? Kambo mato dromoso. Okay. Just making sure that we're going to cover all 4, that we're not raising heads. So Geshe is just explaining that in terms of these principles and these 4 doors to the accumulation of faults, we could say that this is a truly universal Buddhist principle. So it doesn't really matter if you're Theravada or Mahāyāna or how you identify that way. It is a principle that is kind of goes across all. In fact, we could say that even apart from that, anybody who wants a happier, more relaxed and peaceful mind, this is knowledge that they absolutely need to understand. So the second of these 4 doors to the accumulation of faults, in Tibetan, we say bak me. So you could translate this one of 2 ways. I would say heedlessness. You could also say lack of mindfulness. So heedlessness is number 2. So say we have some knowledge, right? We understand a little bit, but we can still fall into faults despite that knowledge because of heedlessness. So the antidote to that heedlessness is really drempa in this sense is remembering, but you could also translate it as mindfulness. So remembering mindfulness. I would say it like that. That's the antidote to heedlessness.
어다 링어 예서가 시다는 샤샤원 로사텔 내치는 여보요 말에 내치는 여보요 알아서 다 템바도 다 시주가 여보를 같이 그나래.
So really Geshe is saying, you know, body, speech, and mind, being aware of those. If they go in this direction, that is something wholesome. If they go in that direction, that is something unwholesome. So having kind of two factors within heedfulness, we have two factors here, Geshe said, the mindfulness, which is remembering what's happening, and the introspection, which is like the awareness of what's going on.
어다 리송아스 어다 सम्바 고슴바테 다 마기바데레. 수지도 조지세 셈바솔 다도 마기바. 지부터 바솔 마기바데 조지.
So the third one is a lack of respect for like holy beings, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and those who possess learning.
다 마기바데요는 걸어서 가르라나라 어다 가서 대서 터고 말해서는 건도 기자매 아이자더니 가르이나 가서 어느 저 일리가 처음에 반복이야.
Otherwise, like with teachers, for example, we can think, okay, like they're just going to say like whatever they're going to say, and like I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do. If you don't have a kind of any sort of reverence or respect for those words, then that takes you in a bad direction.
어다 손지도 손지 셈바소는 여도제 셈발라서 바과다 걸어서 기자 여바 얘는 다 로용도 발까지 터터 걸어서 또 뭐무슨도 아이자 디쇼를 보고.
So if we really have kind of regard for the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, if we possess respect and reverence for those holy beings and beings like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, then we will pay attention to their words, right? And do our best to integrate them, won't we?
어다는 로이제 강가를 폐 조주스 그 여러마도 다 그냥
We understand that those holy beings, right, they only speak things that are going to benefit ourselves and others. They are not going to say things which do not bring benefit.
And
now we come to the fourth, and Geshe said out of these fourth, this is kind of like one of the most important ones, actually. And it is strength or propensity of afflictions. The fourth door to accumulating faults, strength or propensity of the afflictions. So we have to be aware within ourselves how that is happening, like within us, which affliction is the stronger one, is the more problematic, which is arising more frequently, and then also kind of the knowledge that of the antidotes that one needs to apply on the day-to-day level, really, in order to begin to reduce those afflictions. And remember also that the kind of universal antidote, in the sense that it is able to diminish all of the afflictions, is the understanding of the ultimate mode of abiding the way things really are, that wisdom realizing emptiness. Jitompani, right? Gawe Jakikuni. Ale chi. Oh, right. Uh-huh. Loso. So Geshe is going to go through a presentation of emptiness from four angles today. This is new for me as well. So there is, in this presentation, there is outer emptiness, inner emptiness, outer and inner emptiness together, and emptiness of emptiness. So I'll do that one more time. Outer and inner together, emptiness of emptiness. So when we speak about emptiness, of course, we can make this presentation very vast. One place where we could start the conversation is with these ones. So when we say inner, we could think of all different types of minds and so forth. So the emptiness of those minds could be inner emptiness. So outer emptiness would be the emptiness of outer phenomena, various sights, sounds, smells, tastes, those kind of objects. This could be the outer emptiness.
umbonga rawas.
Yeah.
Umbonga itika tumbani tela.
Yeah.
Ane o chono ni ke tumbani se atli yares.
And then when we say outer and inner, here we could think of the 5 sense powers, right? Those 5 sense powers that are within, but also cognize those outer objects. These 5 sense powers are examples of this third category, the outer and inner emptiness.
Ta ko chono ni ka se ge ate no mare kares ko sere rawas.
Yeah.
Umbo drugo no ne umbong chi de seres.
So why do we say outer and inner? Well, it's because in this presentation, remember we said that the inner were minds or consciousnesses. These are not specifically minds or consciousness, right? They are these sense faculties, but at the same time, they're not something outside ourselves, outer either. So that's why they're in this category, inner and outer.
This one, ta shimare kon ta umbo. Right.
So Geshe said, sorry, he said the 5 of younger Sonam. Yeah. So we can't say they're outer in the true sense because they're not outside our body. There's something within us that possess an extremely subtle form, that sense faculty. Oh, so it is like a form, but a kind of like something clear, almost like transparent. Yeah. And so just to be clear, when we say like the eye sense faculty, we're not talking about like the actual physical eyeball. It's said that within that, there's like a very subtle constituent that possesses a very subtle type of form.
This
one? Yeah, so then it is, okay. So just to clarify, also, we talked about the sense faculties here. So when we speak about those, we speak about, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and the 6th one is mind or consciousness. So Geshe said, yeah, this 6th one, you could make the argument maybe that should be an inner, right? But we categorize them together.
This one, that is that tumbani
So then we have the emptiness of emptiness. So that's when we try to find a pinpointable emptiness that is kind of independent and so forth. Then that lack of findability would be the emptiness of emptiness. Right. So because emptiness is something that is kind of like very subtle and profound, it's not so easy to kind of make analogies for it. The kind of closest one that we have is like the analogy of space, right? We can speak of like a space-like emptiness.
So
when we look in the Buddha's sutras, actually, when there are kind of like analogies given for emptiness, the analogy is always the sky. We don't really see anything else. Yeah. So of course, when we speak about space and emptiness, we can see there is a similarity, right? Like it helps us understand, but of course, in terms of the degree of coarseness and subtlety, still between those things, there's a great difference.
So
at first with space, right, it seems like there is kind of a pinpointable space somewhere, but we can easily break this down. Like we can do it directionally, right? The space to the east of us, to the west of us, to the north, to the south, and so forth. And then that sort of sense that there's some pinpointable or findable space there, this dissolves quite quickly. So then emptiness also in terms of profound emptiness, right? Its nature never changes, right? It's always that ultimate mode of abiding. Dongju, right. But the basis of that emptiness, right? The particular object that emptiness is connected with, that is something changeable. Right. So maybe a bit too much of a long-winded introduction, Geshe said, but we talked about that lack of knowledge. So there's lots of knowledge, lots of things to know. Yeah, so he covered a lot there. So these kind of four, it's kind of the beginning points related to emptiness. And of course, this fleshes out and becomes vaster. We can talk about 16 points of emptiness, 18 points of emptiness, 20 points of emptiness, as we continue. So let us place our body and mind in a state of peaceful relaxation. So any unhelpful thoughts, feelings, projections, and so forth, just make the determination to set those aside. Recollecting the four foundations of mindfulness, let us relax our mind and place our mindfulness upon the breath. Think, breathing out, I'm aware, I'm breathing out. And then, if you like, be mindful of the feelings that come up in that moment. Does the breath change or not? What's the sensation when I'm exhaling? What's the sensation or feeling when I'm inhaling? Whatever kind of meaningless thought or distraction enters our mind, don't pay it any heed. Allow it to be like the minnows that swim beneath the surface of the water. They swim, but they do not disturb it. Think the body and mind are different from before. They are still. They are peaceful. Think when we look outwards, ourself, others, part of what perpetuates our circling within samsara, within cyclic existence, is this lack of knowledge of the four foundations of mindfulness. May I come to understand and realize these four foundations of mindfulness, and in this way also lead beings to that knowledge and to freedom. think it is in particular in terms of these four foundations of mindfulness, the foundation of mindfulness of phenomena, specifically lack of mindfulness of its emptiness, that keeps myself and others circling within samsara. May I realize this emptiness of phenomena to reach the state of complete Buddhahood, so that I may lead beings, all sentient beings, to enlightenment. Think in order for this to be accomplished as I wish, we will do the recitations requesting the blessings of the holy beings. So we will begin with the recitation. So Geshe said we're going to go quickly today. So buckle up. Dunba chonden de dijin cheba drachomba yandaba zobe sangye riba dan shasu denba dewa sheba jiten chemba chebu duwe karo jorwa lana meba ladam binamgi dunba sangye chonden de pejawa shakya dubala chazelo chede kyabzu chi ho dunba chonden de dijin cheba drachomba yandaba zobe sanje riba dan shazu denba dewa sheba shiten chemba chebu duwe kalo jorwa rana meba ladam minamgi denba sanje chonden de pejawa shakya dubala chazelo chede kyazu chi ho denba chonden de dijin sheba drachomba yandaba zobe sanje riba dan shazu denba dewa sheba shiten chemba chebu dewe kalo jorwa lana meba lada minamgi dunba sanje chomden de pejawa shakya dubala chazelo chede kyabzu chi ho. Mandala offering. Saji peki jeje medo ja jija lingje nide genba di sangye jindu mide buwagi Jogunanda Jina Chupa Sho Idam Guru Ratna Mendala Kam Niryataya. Refuge in Bodhicitta. Chedon Sogi Chunam La Chanchu Bardu Dani Kyasu Chi Dagi Chinyen Gibe Sunam Gi Jola Penjir Sangye Drupa Sho Chedon Sogi Chunam La Chanchu Bardu Dani Kyasu Chi Dagi Chinyen Gibe Sunam Gi Jola Penjir Sangye Drupa Sho Chedon Sogi Chenam La Chanchu Bardu Dani Kyabsu Chi Dagi Chinyen Gibe Senam Gi Jola Penshir Sangye Joba Sho. So we spent a lot of time kind of bringing forth the motivations and so forth. So we won't go into that too much further today. Yeah. So in terms of the important stuff we covered kind of in that preliminary moment, then in particular, these four doors to the accumulation of faults, right? This is something that you want to try to keep in mind. And also because, you know, especially in terms of the preliminaries, we often connect it to the four foundations of mindfulness, or the four close placements of mindfulness, sometimes translated that way. These are really important things to to kind of become familiar with. And in terms of these four, right, it is the close placement on phenomena, right? The close placement on phenomena, which is kind of particularly vast and important. And so then before we do that close placement of mindfulness on phenomena, then preceding that is the close placement of mindfulness on mind. Then a little bit coarser than that, preceding that is the close placement of mindfulness on feelings. And then sort of the coarsest point where we begin is the close placement of mindfulness on the body. Because the Buddha is supremely skilled in how he conveys the teachings, he began his presentation on the four close placements of mindfulness, starting with the body, because that's kind of the coarsest and most tangible. So then when we speak about the body, once again, we can kind of break this down into three categories. We can speak about an inner body, an outer body, and the third category, once again, is outer and inner. Outer and inner. Yeah. Right. So we'll go into that later if there's time. We won't go into it now, but just in terms of kind of this practice of the close placements of mindfulness, the preliminary for that, kind of starting with a coarser object of focus to sort of ease our way in, is the close placement of mindfulness on the breath. So that's where we often begin. Yeah. And so the close placement of mindfulness of the breath, right, in terms of the four close placements, this would be connected, of course, to the body, because the body and the breath are very connected. And so then when we talk about the close placement of mindfulness on feelings, the kind of coarsest breakdown of that would be pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings. So being aware of that feeling of arising, which of those is it, for example? So many holy beings actually advise that in terms of these close placement of mind, these close placements, of mindfulness, close placement of mindfulness on the body and close placement of mindfulness on feeling can actually be cultivated together. It's often very good to do it that way. But of course, when one is really kind of doing the four close placements of mindfulness thoroughly, then you want to go through each of those four kind of individually. So then in terms of the coarse and subtle aspects of these meditations on the four close placements of mindfulness, there are many. The Tibetan word is nice. It's like kung. So kung actually means source, but it's understood more as like almost in like citations. So there's many kind of things in the sutra which are cited related to this. So then in order to achieve this state of supreme Buddhahood, to enter the Mahāyāna path, which leads to that, we could say that the door to the Mahāyāna path is the mind of bodhicitta. So in order to arise that bodhicitta, we need to bring many causes in together, but the kind of principal cause is this mind of great compassion. And so in order to reach this state of Buddhahood, we understand that this requires us to accumulate the unmistaken causes and also to accumulate the complete set of causes, right? If the causes are incomplete, it's not going to be possible to achieve that final result. So it is in order to be able to familiarize and do that, that is the reason why we are studying the teachings, in particular this Bhāvanākrama, the stages of meditation. And so when we speak about potentials, the potential for liberation, the potential to become a bodhisattva, the Buddha nature, or the potential for full enlightenment, these potentials are actually possessed by all 6 types of sentient beings within samsara. But we don't speak about the Buddhas themselves as having Buddha nature. Why is that? It's because that potentiality has reached a state of perfection, right? So it's a different thing. So, but we can say that definitely in terms of that potential, the Tathagata Garbha or essence, the potential for Buddhahood, this is something that is possessed by all 6 types of beings. And that potentiality, Geshe thinks, is also something that is agreed to in the Mahāyāna and Theravada side of the teachings. So with that understanding, then, we will be able to see even the tiniest insect as something precious and important, because we'll understand that by the reasoning of its potentiality, right? The potential of that insect. Because we can't really say for sure, right, that little tiny insect that I'm pointing to, or myself, which one of us will reach the state of liberation first. We can't say that with certainty, right? So if we're relaxed and take it easier and that insect is a little bit more diligent, it's possible that it reaches liberation before we do. So there's many kind of histories of that in the scriptures that illustrate exactly that point. So all sentient beings possess those potentialities. We've asserted this, but in terms of activating or actualizing those potentialities, there is a very great difference. Yeah. Can I say it? That's simple. Okay. All right. Then we have the 7-point cause and effect instructions and the equalizing and exchanging self and other instructions. But in the context of those various points, we don't speak about Dinso rik sepa dangjawa yore omare. Kawatsigiyores dun nangola.
Niji chembo ta tejan go chu garwas tila. Ate niji chembo ngel se mo boyo rawas.
Right.
Kal ta chembo re tene ina re se ba se yo ma.
So then in terms of these 7-point cause and effect instructions and equalizing and exchanging self and others, there's many points that we're kind of cultivating and realizing, but we don't speak of those points as being the activation of the Mahāyāna lineage before we reach that point of great compassion. And so, if we're not really kind of stable in this cultivation, to reach that point is not something that is so easy, right? It could take many kalpas, many eons. Yeah, if we don't do it, in a kind of steady way. If we cultivate steadily, it's even possible within this life.
So
that activation of the Mahāyāna lineage, once again, when does that actually happen? The activation of the lineage happens when great compassion has been brought forth. So great compassion is very important. It's also kind of a very important border or point in terms of cultivation. So when we speak about bodhicitta, when we talk about substantial and auxiliary causes or conditions, we could say that great compassion is the substantial cause of bodhicitta. So there's also some difficult points and maneuvering around that, but we can come to a fuller explanation later. And when we speak about whether great compassion arises or not, then we need to kind of look at two causes that underpin that great compassion. We could also say the two doors to great compassion. So one of those causes, a very important one, is this impartial mind, this mind of impartiality that sees every sentient being as close to us, every single sentient being as precious, and so forth. So our task here is really to think about whoever that person is that's the closest to you in this life. Just think of that person who is the closest to you. You want to be able to, with complete impartiality, see every single sentient being exactly in the way that you see that most cherished person. And the second factor, so that's the first factor. The second factor is, having seen all of these beings as connected and close to us, the awareness that all those sentient beings continue to circle within samsara, within cyclic existence. So if you think about that person that is closest to you, if they fell into some sort of terrible problem or calamity, naturally you would be spurred to action. Day and night, you would do whatever you had to try and save them from that problem. So really, if you really have that feeling that all of those beings are just like that person closest to you, the measure of having really experienced that is that day and night there will be a stable wish to help them. That was in yeah. Loso. Yeah. So then, if you think about those persons closest to you, and you think about this feeling, we could say, of like concern or empathy that we have for them, it could get to a point where you've done everything you can from your side to get them established, and they have enough to eat, they have enough to drink, all of their needs are met, and so forth. So you could come to the conclusion, okay, they're fine now, right? it would be possible to come to that conclusion. We could also think that about ourselves, right? Like, I'm well established enough, I have what I need, kind of, let's leave it here. Yeah. So what does that show us? That when our basic needs are kind of in place, or that other beings' basic needs are in place, what does that say about our compassion? It says that our compassion still has some degree of being tainted by the afflictions. Yeah. So we have to, if we think about that, like, you think about your most cherished person, you think about that kind of compassion. Okay, they have what they need and they're safe and whatever, and then you feel okay to leave it there. This shows that that compassion is still tainted by affliction. So then what do? We try to improve that compassion so that it is completely separated from affliction. So how do we kind of get to this higher level of compassion? This higher level of compassion isn't just thinking like we want to kind of take care of their suffering and the suffering of change, but we also want to separate them from that all-pervasive or compounded suffering. When that compassionate wish is really connected to a wish for them to be free from that pervasive suffering, this is now getting to a higher level of compassion. So what we want to do is take those people that are close to us in this life, and that sort of like natural regard, that natural compassion that we have for them, use that kind of as a starting point, and then improve that and also expand that out. So now we are going to turn to the text. So in terms of where we are in the English, folks, we are on, for me, it is page 14. It's just a little less than halfway down the page. We're starting where it says, alas, alas. So actually, kind of Geshe said what he said all led up to this, because now we're really at that point where that compassion is being brought forth. So just keep in mind also the preliminaries that we discussed. We want to be able to bring forth bodhicitta. In order for bodhicitta to be able to be brought forth, we need to have great compassion, and great compassion is connected with those 2 points that were explained. Yeah. So reading what Geshe read out. Alas, all my beloved sentient beings are in such pain. What can I do to set them free and make their sufferings? What can I do to set them free, make their sufferings your own? Whether you are engaged in one-pointed meditation or pursuing your ordinary activities, meditate on compassion at all times, focusing on all sentient beings and wishing them to be free from suffering. So taking as the kind of point of reference the person closest to you, who you have kind of a natural concern for, a natural compassion for, we want to extend this out to include all sentient beings.
다 동본의 세제 통제 라미 비숑바도 니지 에서게 치도 년보 요아래 다니 제레 되는 거 봐라 와 다른 바지도 그래 되는마.
So what it explains as we move through the text, we'll see that it's great, of course, to say, I have love and compassion for all sentient beings, but we're not going to kind of be able to get there unless we work up towards that through stages, right? So this is going to be explained as we move along.
세제 통제 세르셀 데 아니 가리 데자자라고 지. 세제 통제 라미 니지 그거를 숑바 그거를 세르셀 데본라고 지 하래. 세제 레레사 판로 그들라. 그래 또다
So it might seem that it's easy to kind of bring forth this attitude that I love all sentient beings, that I have compassion for all sentient beings. But if you kind of zoom in and then think of like individual beings or individual groups of beings and check, you'll see that that love and compassion maybe isn't as, what's the word, encompassing or universal as you thought, right?
다 가서 두시에 사이 마신 가서 지루 지루 아버지 여기 좀 세네. 아니 소설 강에 되게 되게 셀데스 갈렌디다.
소설 강에 되게 밍제게. Yeah. So Geshe, one of Geshe's friends was talking about the difficulty of cultivating this, you know, and when we meet that person who really kind of gets under our skin, who's giving us a lot of problems, and try to develop compassion for them, it's actually pretty hard. So we'll immediately kind of uncover our limitation.
다 도마 당연히 그런 내가 요하는 저와 간에서 또 그래서 도마 코난 자시지 쇼너라 저게 maybe 누가 나서 녀선용 통이 권바샤고.
So then the next part of the text answers the question, well, how do we kind of go about working towards that in stages? And the instruction says, begin by meditating on your friends and relatives. Recognize how they experience the various sufferings that have been explained. So we kind of start with that person that's the very closest to us, and then we expand it a little bit to kind of like the near and dear ones, to that group of the people with whom we are connected. And then we kind of cultivate love and compassion beginning there. So as actually we can cultivate the way to rely on the virtuous friend. It's also this. So just in terms of a translation point, if you're interested, this is often rendered as guru devotion, but devotion is the word we use in English. The Tibetan is really tensul, the way to rely. So Geshe said, when you're cultivating the way to rely on the spiritual teacher, it gives a similar kind of advice that you start with that main teacher who moves your mind the most, and then you try to extend that regard that you have for him or her to all your other teachers as well. It functions in the same way. So then you meditate on your friends and relatives, you recognize how they experience the various sufferings that have been explained. Then, having seen all sentient beings as equal, with no difference between them, you should meditate on sentient beings to whom you are neutral. So then you don't want to just leave aside those beings to whom you are neutral. You really have this awareness of connection that they are the same as those close to me. And so then Geshe said it's not mentioned specifically here, but usually how this meditation is explained is after you do it for the friends, after you do it for the people who are neutral or strangers, you then want to extend that feeling of compassion to your enemies or the people that you're having difficulty with. So Geshe said the words to do that with the people that you're finding difficult are not in the text here, but it's absolutely an essential part of the meditation. Geshe said he's not sure if he remembers correctly, but it may in fact come a little bit later. So when we come to some facility in being able to cultivate this compassion for friends, for strangers, and for enemies, once we do that with the three categories, then it's very natural to be able to begin to extend that to all sentient beings. So that's the principle here. Getting to that point, however, is not easy. And that's why there are different methods for arising this mind, the 7-point cause and effect instruction, the equalizing and exchanging self and others. These are kind of all important things to cultivate. So the one that all of us, have kind of one thing that all of us sort of have some experience with is this mind of anger, right? Yeah. So initially, right, in that first instance of anger, when we're experiencing it, it might not be kind of connected to a reason very strongly. But then when we ruminate over it and think about all of the reasons and the righteous points that we have that give us like a right to be angry, then we'll see that what happens is that anger actually becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. Sorry. Alengan so hale pe nepatsa champo kapla shiadang tanya boyim pe kapla datong ne tu gires. Ale. Yeah. So we'll see that when we look at wars and things like this, right? People are willing even to kind of sacrifice their lives in order to bring a measure of harm to their enemies, right? And that's because they've kind of ruminated, built up many reasons to be angry at that enemy, even to the point of risking their lives for revenge. So of course, we're not saying that all soldiers have this mentality, but the ones who are kind of really in the fight with their will and with their wish, it would be something like that. Yeah. But it's the same with love and compassion. The more reasons that we kind of contemplate to have that love and compassion, the stronger and stronger that love and compassion will get, and the wider and more encompassing that circle of love and compassion can become. Mm-hmm. And in this way, it's also said that in terms of the bodhisattvas and the hearers and solitary realizers, the way that the sharp faculty bodhisattva approaches emptiness is extremely kind of like efficient and solid, because they are going through hundreds and thousands of reasonings behind emptiness. So to be clear, all these beings kind of realize emptiness, but in terms of the efficiency and solidity that when they bring forth that realization, there's a big difference between the sharp faculty bodhisattvas, and the hearers, the shravakas, and solitary realizers, pratyeka Buddhas. So now we're going to continue. Gangitse de la Geshe. So when the compassion you feel towards them is the same as the compassion you feel towards your friends and relatives, meditate on compassion for all sentient beings throughout the 10 directions of the universe. Yeah. So Geshe said when we say 10 directions, probably a lot of you know what that means, but just again, it's the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 intermediate directions, that brings us to 8, and then above and below, that brings us to 10. So, just as a mother responds to her small, beloved, and suffering child, when you develop a spontaneous and equal sense of compassion towards all sentient beings, you have perfected the practice of great compassion. And it is this that, you have perfected the practice of compassion. And it is this that is known as great compassion. So Geshe said, this example is given because, especially in Tibet, the kind of bonds of love between a mother and her child were seen as the very strongest bonds. And the bonds of affection were so tight that in many cases when a child died, the mother would die from the grief, or when a mother died, a small child would die from the grief, right? This is the strength of that bond. Yeah, yeah. So because the mother, for example, has that overwhelming feeling of suffering and compassion for, has that overwhelming feeling of compassion. It's good. Has that overwhelming, let's have to get it out first. I have to correct it, right? So I have to get it out first. Has that overwhelming feeling of compassion for her suffering child. She will do anything and everything to help them. She has that kind of determination. So we see this also with the animals. In fact, there's sometimes where we can say that the animals are even kind of more naturally empathetic than human beings, because a mother animal will in many cases sacrifice her life without a second thought in order to be able to protect her child. We see so many examples of this. Oh, Chuganga. Chudiro. Yeah. Teor Ganga kosan. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Amati pogete nije so.
Yeah.
Pogete amati nije sama soso pete sono tu mduas niki pati.
So Geshe said he thinks he's told this story before, but he just wants to give a synopsis of it again. And this is a story of a mother and of a mother and daughter who somehow they fell into the Ganges River, right? And the Ganges River was kind of flowing very strongly, and they were actually in danger of losing their lives. And at that moment, the mother was only thinking about, oh, my daughter is in this terrible situation, and lamenting that there's nothing I can do to help. Similarly, the daughter was thinking, my mother's in this terrible situation, and lamenting that there is nothing I can do to help, right? They were both completely worried about the situation of the other one without grasping it all at themselves. So they kind of had that bond of compassion and that true attitude of mercy, just seeing the other person as completely important. And of course, in the end, they ended up both dying in the water.
다 이나요 이지디 온게 샤와지 마트는 니가 사야 보셔 시스모.
But due to the power of compassion that they had for one another, the lack of self-concern, they were both reborn in a deva realm, in a god realm, after passing away from that life.
다 하도 못더니 자갈 디딩가 뭐 뭐야. 와서 예시 요겠는데 따게들 저 공간으로 리포트가 있는 디파트하는 샤와지만 하시는 게 돼서 코러스 때만 통해요.
So at that time, there was this view, actually, and even some kind of like rishis or yogis or whatever who possess some kind of clairvoyance, they sort of had an idea what happened, and then they said, look at the blessings of the mother river Ganga. You know, they washed themselves in it, their sins were purified, and this is the reason that they were born in the god realm, in the deva realm. Yeah. So Geshe said, you know, now we still see this ritual where there's many thousands, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of people bathing in this water. And sort of our take on it would be, maybe it's connected with that misperception. But Geshe said that's maybe not completely fair. They could have, you know, many of their own valid reasonings why they think that this is important to do. But anyways, that's the way the story goes. So those kind of Indian rishis, right? They were very accomplished yogis, and they had some degree of clairvoyance. So they knew that the mother and the daughter were reborn in the Deva realms. However, they didn't know the very subtle reason, the mind that they brought forth, that was the real cause of why they were born there. Yeah. So So Geshe said, you know, people who have this view, they may have other reasons for their view, but anyways, he's just telling the story as it is told. But we understand the principle of the story, right? That the mother and the daughter being reborn in that Deva realm, the principal cause of that was not the blessing of the waters of the river Ganga. The principal cause of that was the compassion that they each brought forth for the other. And that's not even great compassion in the true sense of that greatness in this case. It's just compassion, but such is the power of that compassionate mind. So then it just clarifies in the text, right? Once you can bring that equal sense of compassion towards all sentient beings, that practice is perfected, and it's actually that which is meant by great compassion. That's what that term means. So Geshe said we'll continue on within the text because this very much mirrors the same principle. So meditation on loving kindness begins with friends and people you are fond of. It has the nature of wishing that they meet with happiness. Gradually extend the meditation to include strangers and even your enemies. Habituating yourself with compassion, you will gradually generate a spontaneous wish to liberate all sentient beings. Right. Karin sa nguma ningje gimsen den so ke pa yin sang dene
미미용요 소노도 자소나 건조 찌는 간조 릴라고 레는 거와 쇼마도니지.
Okay, tis good. Younger sundan good.
단다 있는 간조 니지 곰 쇼마 곰바이나.
Yeah.
대체 뭐뭐 소노 마토는 요줄 시로 지금 되와스.
Right.
다 용요 소노도나.
Yeah.
건조 찌를 대체 뭐 먹기만 생제 소노도 그디니.
Right.
레준 거로 왔어.
So because of kind of our lack of, I guess, habituation to this, we talk about compassion for all sentient beings. We talk about love for all sentient beings, but we can't bring it forth in a way that is truly encompassing and, you know, and that is all encompassing and universal. But once we understand the reasons behind it, what we'll see is that naturally, when we just think like sentient beings, that love and compassion naturally kind of infuse the mind.
변화 단다 다 이제 뭐 어수자바이나 밤마도 잘 용시 바치레스 나죠. 고메아이자.
Yeah.
바도니제.
영투기 말했어.
영투가만도 왔어.
Yeah.
이제 뭐 소노토나 때 용시 바치레마도.
Right. So right now, like in our current state, if we try to bring forth that love and compassion for those we see as enemies, or even for strangers, we might not actually be successful in being able to do that. We first really need to kind of familiarize ourselves, become convinced of the various reasons behind that.
다 소소그니 때라 이제 뭐 뭐치는 소노토 뭐게 발론솔 그게 강에 태서는 고디 와서.
But we see that for those people who we hold close to us, if they meet with some trouble, very naturally that compassion arises. We don't need to think about reasonings behind it. We just kind of feel it, right? So that same experience with the power of habituation to compassion can gradually come to include all sentient beings. Yeah.
So
we end here. Therefore, having familiarized yourself with compassion as the basis, meditate on the awakening mind of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is of two types, conventional and ultimate. So this particular text is of the sutra tradition, and we understand that in the understanding of the sutra tradition, when we talk about conventional and ultimate bodhicitta, it's conventional bodhicitta that is truly bodhicitta, not really ultimate. So when we say ultimate bodhicitta, the word bodhicitta is there, but we understand that we are really talking about emptiness. A mind that is single-pointedly abiding on emptiness. Yeah. Kunzup Jangchu Gisem. Right. So we all know, so we know that there are these. Getting the sauce today. So we have these 5 paths, right? These 5 Mahāyāna paths: accumulation, preparation, seeing, meditation, and no more learning, right? So on the first of these, which is the Mahāyāna path of accumulation, that Mahāyāna path of accumulation, that is achieved when one has achieved the relative or conventional bodhicitta. Soklam dang kunzo jangchi gisem tobiagi tusa chipares. Yeah. Tekshin git soklam dene. Yeah. Right. So we can understand as one meaning in the sutric context here, the Mahāyāna path of accumulation, bodhicitta, and relative bodhicitta. For our purposes, in this context, they are the same. However, on that path, that doesn't mean that on that path that the bodhisattva is not cultivating ultimate bodhicitta or emptiness, right? He or she could be. Yeah. But when is that ultimate bodhicitta actually realized or achieved? It is realized on the Mahāyāna path of seeing. So for our purposes here, once again, Mahāyāna path of seeing and ultimate bodhicitta, it's the same thing.
대제죠 돌로토바 아니 조지선바 바바차바
Yeah.
아니 대도 조지 세토바.
So that moment that one is on the Mahāyāna path of seeing, ultimate bodhicitta is realized, one becomes an Arya Bodhisattva or a superior Bodhisattva. And those are kind of connected also with the perfect practices of method and the perfect practices of wisdom. And these practices of method and wisdom are the two wings of the bird which will allow us to travel to enlightenment. Listen, so we will end it here for this text. So when we come to an explanation of the Vajrayana of the Tantra, kare? There's also talk about how that single-pointed realization of emptiness is a type of a great compassion, but that's a discussion we're going to have later. Okay, so we are moving now to our next text. And so we are on page 3. Temba shawe chuchina. Ale. Topa dang tuji. Oh, right. Yep. Okay. So we are on page 3, and we are on the 10 things you should keep, beginning with keep to a sublime master. That's where we are. Yeah. So Geshe said here, he doesn't really like keep. We can understand it more as rely. The idea is really an idea of rely. And that's why, and that's what that word 10 really means. I don't know how this became devotion, because to me that sounds very, very, no offense, because of course I respect all religions, but it sounds very Abrahamic. Rely is really what the word 10 means, how to rely on the teacher. So rely on a sublime master who is realized and compassionate. That is number 1. Oh, right. So Geshe said that a friend of his was kind of joking with him. Wouldn't it be nice if you could ask the Buddha before you choose to rely on a Lama, Buddha, is this a good Lama to rely on or not, right? Wouldn't it be nice if we could actually do that? But unfortunately, we're not in that situation. So if you want to kind of understand this point of how to rely upon the spiritual teacher, the Lam Rim gives us a really good compass. And in the Lam Rim, or the stages of the path, what you'll see is a definition of a qualified guru, a definition of a qualified student, the way to rely upon the teacher. Once again, it's that word 10, rely. The benefits of relying and the disadvantages of not relying. Yes. So many holy beings actually say that if you have a guru who fills all of the requirements, if you have a student who has all of the qualities, and the way of relying is correct, the student actually holds a Buddha in the palm of their hand. They hold a Buddha in the very palm of their hand. Number 2, keep to a hermitage that is remote, pleasant, and blessed. And this is actually because of our drawbacks, right? Because we have a propensity, we are habituated towards the afflictions. When we want to focus on practice, it's good to have our place of practice, a place that is a little bit out of the way and blessed by great beings. So the next one, keep to companions who have a harmonious view and conduct and who are trustworthy. So Geshe just glossing this as really having our good Dharma friends. So you want to be in agreement, right? Be congruent in terms of both one's view and one's conduct or behavior. Keep moderation, remembering that too many articles to sustain life can involve unwholesome deeds. So this actually relates, if we look at the Buddha's sutras, the discourses of the Buddha, we can talk about the Pakpe Rik Jirwa, the 4 characteristics of an Arya, of a superior being. So we want to kind of go the middle way, right? Without having too much, but also without having too little, that we can't sustain ourselves. This is kind of the way to continue. So really the principle here is that we want contentment, right? We want to be content with having enough. Number 5, keep to the oral instructions of the lineage of accomplished masters without prejudice. So this means that what we need to do is we need to receive many instructions from valid teachers, right? So we want to be able to take instructions, also lung or oral transmissions and those kinds of things. Keep to what is of benefit for both yourself and others with regard to material things, medicines, mantras, and profound causation. So Geshe said that in particular, when we talk about the practice of Vajrayana or secret mantra, this allows us to kind of bless medicines. There are all kinds of uncommon substances and so forth, and these can be of great benefit to others. Keep to food and the path of means that is in harmony with your physical constitution. So we know that this is something that is very true when we are trying to study and practice the teachings. We need a body and mind that is balanced and well. So we need to eat the correct food, like the correct diet, which will help us ensure that. Otherwise, there can be all kinds of obstacles. Keep to spiritual practices and behavior that help your experience. So really, there's many practices that you can do. Seeing which one of those you have affinity for, which one easily kind of brings forth the feelings in your heart, those are the ones that you want to practice again and again and again. So don't be like a practice tourist, right? Saying that I went to this country and ate their food, then I went to another country and ate their food, then I went to this country and ate their food. Like it's maybe good to have those experiences, but that's not the way that spiritual practice works, right? We want to identify the ones that work for us and then have consistency. Yeah. So, how do we kind of determine that? Well, we can say that when my mind was in difficulty, I engaged in this practice and I came to some benefit. So as we learn different things, we see which ones are effective and we put our focus on those. So how we do it is, right, in the beginning, we identify those practices that are most helpful for us. And once we become skilled in those, gradually we expand out and can incorporate more. Yeah. So we can, if you look at, for example, the teachings that His Holiness the Dalai Lama has given, right? Because he's given such a huge number and big variety of teachings, he could be explaining the same topic, emptiness, and in one teaching, the explanation is like it really touches us somehow. We think, I really got something here. But on another occasion, he could be speaking about it in a different way, and you can say, well, it may be like really profound, but I'm just not getting it, right? So we identify the one that works for us, and we begin our cultivation there. So we also figure that out, right, by using different ones. Okay. Keep to disciples who are worthy, trusting, and respectful. Yeah. Ma di duljare, kare gupa duljare, inji nangola gegen mare duljare. Yeah. Oh, right. Di gegen gila. Yeah. So Geshe was saying that this one is actually the advice for the teacher, right? So a teacher wants to invest in students that are worthy, trusting, and respectful. That's going to be the most effective use of their time. Yeah. Kungshus. Right. So there's a story about one Lama who was kind of lamenting, complaining to the Dharma protectors, saying that like you're not bringing me good students. Yeah. He said, I'm going to give up my teaching unless you actually kind of show me a disciple who's really sincere. So there's one story that goes something like that. Yeah, because of course, if there are no people who are willing to cultivate the instructions of the teacher, there's not really much of a point to the teacher continuing to teach, is there? Number 10, always keep mindful and conscientious during the 4 daily activities. Dro dea. Oh, mare jijiden so kare sundang. Dea dang droa. Yeah. Droa depa nikuya dang. Sumbadi kalasaya. So Geshe said he thinks the 4 activities here may be coming, going, sleeping, and eating and drinking. He's not sure, but he thinks these may be the 4 activities. Yeah. So we can understand the meaning in that way. So our activities of body, speech, and mind, we actually kind of mentioned this earlier. We always want to have sort of heedfulness, mindfulness, and also introspection. So, thank you very much. We shall end it here. Let us dedicate the merits nicely. Changjo Zenjo Rinpoche Maje Panam Jejo Rachi Chewa Nyamba Meba Yang Gone Gondo Pewa Risho Tongni Tawa Rinpoche Maje Panam Jejo Rachi Chewa Nyamba Meba Yang Gone Gondo Pewa Risho Jambe Bao Jidar Gyamba Tang Kundu Zambo Deyan Dejin Deda Kungi Jesu Dalo Jir Gewa Deda Tamshe Rabdungo Dusun Shebe Gewa Tamshe Ge Ngowa Gangla Jodu Ngabade Dagi Gewe Zawa Dikun Kyang Zambo Joji Rabdu Ngowa Ki Gangri Rawe Kowe Shinkan Di Pendan Dewa Malu Jongwe Ne Chenre Ziwan Denzen Jazo Ye Shape Site Badu Tenkyo So then through the merits that we have accumulated, we dedicate to this, that all sentient beings are able to bring forth the quality of regard, of mercy for others. May those beings who are possessing evil thoughts and conduct, may these be cleared away through the force of merit, and may they be able to bring forth minds of empathy, love, and compassion. And through these merits, may my practices be able to come out exactly as I aimed or wished for. May they be perfected. So we'll pause it there. Just give me a moment, I'm sorry, to adjust the volume, and then we'll take questions. As always, if you need to get on with your day, shovel some snow or something, please feel free. But if you'd like to stay for questions, we also would love to have you. All right. So, questions welcome.
Well, you want to do show?
Questions? Yeah, she said if you have questions, please ask. Otherwise, it's holiday.
Go ahead, Ryan. Or actually, Ryan's unmuted, but maybe he doesn't have a question. But I see that Laura. Go ahead, Laura.
Go for it, Laura. Yeah.
Thank you, Geshe. Thank you, Kendrapla. Did I say it right? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Kendrapla.
no, it's you said it right before. It's just that J is like a little too high from me. I'm just regular old Kedrup, so La is fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to be respectful. That's why.
No, it's kind. It's kind. No, I understand that. No worries.
So,
what's your question?
my question is regarding emptiness of emptiness. Could you please explain that concept? Because it's a little bit difficult. Because when we get to the point to think about emptiness, sometimes we think that it's something with itself, like self-existent concepts, but actually the emptiness itself also doesn't exist.
Right.
To me, yeah, you know what I mean? Because the conceptualization makes the emptiness like something that we can grasp, but actually it's not there. So to fully eradicate the whole thing of, the inherent existence of the entire thinking, the entire, like conception, we have to also think the emptiness itself, it's empty, but that's kind of, like twisting concept to me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. I'll do my best. Nganso tompani chik sung go to do di kale kakshores tompani tets cheshi jauroches karin sena nganso tompani gomja pe kapola nganso chik ragores tompani di zin tu gires tapo chik sangere dua roa ine nga tompani zin tubna dene tompani di rangjingi drupa dapo chik chagire duas roa dene nganso tompani di kandes gongores nganso tompani gi tompani kandes legores tompani kandes lagore chik zingo gi netsu di arangshin gi drupa gi norwa di kandes me pasogores
다들 demoraba 다 나로서 빼는 나세 하tin 걸 알레 못 따지서 그러was 로지요도 매 나한테 빈봉가 있는 짠에 라이도도 못 따지서 그랬어.
So one of the things we can do to kind of get there is to first begin with the examination of the emptiness of the I or the self. And so we think that, is there an inherently existent I or not? Is there an I or a self that is findable within the five aggregates or not?
다 나짠이라야 매바테 다 기체는 다 간조 달세 갔다 때제 달리라가 나고 간조 용시 바지라was.
And the reason we start here is because in terms of that lack of a findable essence or a pinpointable thing, the I or the self is one of the easier things to kind of get to that point with.
뭐 라바 때 리라버테 뚱바니도 놓서 따따들에게 요마다스. 나도 간조 나세 고레마드 라바레마드 고바테도 간조 텐드조 토그라was. 이나 테투마니 테짜니 라야메바 테도 뚱바니 마르다스죠.
So, and it starts out in an easy way. If we start with the physical body, there's no self within the head. It's not within the chest. It's not within the hand, within the legs, and so forth. So that's not actually kind of emptiness in terms of what we're trying to cognize, but just that process of examination is taking us into the right direction.
Yes, ma.
Yes. Right. Yeah. So the lack of findability of that self, not being able to pinpoint it if we find it, that's the emptiness of the self right there, that lack of findability. And so if we're doing this as an analytical meditation, at that point you say there's no findable self at all, and then you say, okay, I've contemplated the emptiness of the self. So then we have to say that lack of inherent existence of the self, that lack of inherent existence that we've identified, does that emptiness of the inherent existence exist from its own side or not? Is there a findable emptiness of inherent existence that we can pinpoint or not? And this is very difficult, right? Because the emptiness of inherent existence is a subtle emptiness. So it's not as kind of like pinpointable as the emptiness of the self is, maybe?
nga roji me ba khoro la yung sha ga cha na ga cha shong ga cha tani shejin du ma du yawa
Is that lack of inherent existence of the self something that I can find or grasp onto in the West, in the East, in the North, or in the South?
pena no di no ga no ka ja la ba ina
Mhm.
to mo zu zu yo ba no ha si ta jin du was kuma di no ga no ka
Yeah.
no ka
Right.
sana tumba de son su long so yung du was
So we can talk about the space within this room where Geshe and I are sitting. So the space within this room, within this house, we can say that is empty, right? It's empty of objects. That seems something like kind of more identifiable.
ta wana di no ga no ka de yung sha ga de re du no le zu zu san du shong le zu zu san du se no ka de won zu zu san me ba shwa was
But that space within the house, if we try to say that it is something pinpointable, we'll say, where is that pinpointable space of the house? Is it in sort of the part of the house that is facing to the north, the part of the house that is facing to the south? Is it in the part of the house to the east or to the west? And then we see that it's not as findable as it seemed to be, that space.
ta te pe zo ne le kuma no ga tu mani za la ti tu mani tel ta ya ten za che ba shi shi da
So the space within the house and determining its lack of findability, this is also how you can determine the lack of findability of emptiness, and that would be the emptiness of emptiness. So that's one way to approach this.
this one tani ngai tu mani phoba no ga tu mani sa ta ka wa ina ja ya was
Right, and you can apply that across to kind of any object. Also the space within the cup, right? Where is that pinpointable findable space within the cup and so forth. So this is kind of the basic principle.
shi to cha shi bu tong ba su ke ba su la ba ina ta ngaro so le tong ba ka ka ze ta ta ung bang go la te shu ta ka re le tong bi ka la
Tomba gola,
ro je me bi go la
gangla.
te shu ta ka re
Rangjimepa, yeah. So the holy beings really advise that when we're starting with emptiness as a beginner, we really want to focus on emptiness in terms of Rangjimeparwa, not being naturally existent or not being inherently existent.
tumba do tian ju go no le tong bi ka la zo tong ben go la shu ja ya ka chim bo ji
And it's also said that for a beginner, when we're looking at the connection between emptiness and dependent arising, we're kind of approaching it more from the emptiness side in the beginning.
ta te ma za di ni min te re sa shra la ya so ta nyo nyo la ta zo ta ya ji res
Kare tomba ni
tumba do
gita
tian ju ni zo se zo ka re zo go mo ga
Right. But Geshe said he doesn't necessarily know that that's universal. He thinks it could work for some people more to approach through the dependent arising and then go to emptiness. But generally, this is what is said.
ji zhen jo me yong la ma zo ka pa la tumba go la shu che cha de ta no ang go la te zi ka za chim bo so ko
So remember, Manjushri advised to Lama Tsongkhapa that you're focusing too much on the side of emptiness. Also look at the side of appearance, right? So we need both.
ta tumba do tian ju ni ta ji ge zhu ji no de ta de za na zo ba ya re
So that's how we proceed, right, with emptiness and dependent arising, how they kind of underpin and assist each other.
ya tumba ni le la mo de ten ale ti ji ten ji re de
So the emptiness of emptiness, not easy, but those are some strategies, Laura, that you can maybe approach it a little bit.
Thank you, Geshe. Thank you, Kendra. That was very helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
gwaja manda wa te ya da tumba ni gwaja de ru ji ba khoro ro was
Yeah. So really, and also identifying that object of negation, right? Emptiness's object of negation is inherent existence, right?
tumba ni gwaja de tumba ni ru ji ba de ta
So the emptiness of emptiness's object of negation, tompani ranjingi jupati kasha, is the inherent existence of emptiness. That's the object of negation in this case.
ta manda wa te se ke de ji bi wa
Yeah, so then we can see a little bit kind of how those are looked at differently.
yeah
So I guess we'll take the next question.
Go ahead, Tegile. And then I have a couple.
All right. Thank you for the teachings today. My question is, before we're even on the path and we're cultivating great compassion to get onto it, or compassion, I think I'm referring to people that are not necessarily even on the path or aware of the path. Just helping other people. Is it valid or even useful to equalize their own relationship with themselves? There's so many times that we're talking friend, enemy, stranger, and I've encountered many people, including myself, that don't care about and even hate parts of themselves. Is it valid to start with equalizing first what they're doing around their body? Like I hate my cancer, but I love my, don't even notice my breathing, but I love.
Sorry,
this.
Jackie Lee, sorry, I'm just gonna, because
Yeah.
How is that equalizing yourself with yourself if you say I hate your cancer, but I'm going back to my breathing? I'm not really
So
understanding.
the equalizing would be bringing each to what you love most. So what we're doing with great compassion is taking friend, enemy, and stranger and strengthening them with the love of the thing you love most. Like the mother's love, the mother-child love.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So the question would be, well, if you're starting with somebody's health or someone who isn't into all this stuff yet, is it valid to even start with them, helping them identify what they love most about themselves and
I see what you're saying.
And try to
so
bring
you're trying to see yourself in the same way with the characteristic of yourself that you love and appreciate the most. You're trying to see the whole self like you see that characteristic that you like about yourself. Am I understanding it?
Yeah, I think because I've worked in health that I run into both Dharma people and others that are doing these practices or not, that are absolutely disking themselves.
Right. But I understood the principle correctly, right?
Yes, you got it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, I got you. That's what I just wanted to make sure, because I want to make sure I get a good answer from Geshe.
Thank you.
Then no problem. Then also Dagjen Nyamshak Dabochikirwa. Dagjen Nyamshak sena the Nyamje, sorry. Nyamje, not Nyamshak. Nyamje, then also Dagjen Nyamje di Rwadi sena di Ngarang gi Tsora Kechembo Yimpa. Mi di nang shin ke chembo dabo tsigores roa dagjen nyamjak chik roa ine nganso nup chokla mi mambo chik koronso sheda gagi omare koronso so la roa sheda gaya omare so sheda gaya menana dene so nanglo la perna so mi halepe duksha samso tawa dabo chikyona so nanglo la kesha gaya chikres nge nanglola gi kesha di dapo nge cha tsangwa gi netso di dapo chik tagores kande yapores chimarung di samlo tangna degire besa.
Yeah, that mo to alen jo to yatene sono to na de was.
Loso.
So te so la alen mege. Ya kiwo ge yo me. Ja chimbo zhe ge yo me.
Yeah.
可是咱们没这个没有这个。
Yeah, so sa chempo matsigen, 是吧？
没说给我个要多没。给我个要那我没多么可能是弄进到那个是吧
So Geshe said yes, he thinks it's okay to cultivate in that way, like to equalize and exchange yourself, like the characteristic that you like about yourself, and to try to see the entire self in that way. But also Geshe said that if you're running into this like objection of like equalizing and exchanging, I don't even like myself, how can I like others? If they're doing that kind of attitude, ask a simpler question. Say, do you want happiness or not? Do you want happiness or not? Ask them that.
다 소설 보게 대시 그거요도 매. 내가 여보 강가 소설 그건도 대지. 대 그거 요나 대 노지지. 다 예라요 그거래.
So just change the language. Do you want happiness or not? Do you want safety or not? If you want happiness and safety for yourself, also wish for others to have happiness and safety. And that can be kind of equalizing and exchanging, just using a bit different language, Geshe.
This way. What that religion ale koro kanila no mala tendo. 소소 그야 여보 강가 그거도 뭐도
Yeah.
어때 그거는
So Geshe thinks that it's actually quite easy to kind of cut through that noise of I don't like myself if you ask different questions like, do you want good things? Do you want to be safe? Do you want to be comfortable? When you're asking someone questions like that, it's pretty sure you're going to get a yes. And so if you wish that for yourself, just wish that for others.
그때도 지지는시고 말을 강가 영어로만도 딱 그냥 그거를 자대야 돼. 소소로 거기 다 여보여야 지게 된다 알릴 같이 되게 말았어.
So look at how busy our society is and all of the different things that people are doing, all of the effort and kind of outflows of energy they have for that's with the hope that they're going to find some sort of happiness, right? That's why they're engaging in all those things.
다용 같은 거 다 들으지래서 어다 대거 내가 요나 어다 소소로 내가 놓지 제라 그거를 예사야 돼.
So if you wish for that happiness or for safety for yourself, then we can come to the logical conclusion that others also wish for that happiness and safety. And then we see that when we start to wish that happiness and safety for others, that can become the root of our own happiness. So this could be like a different way of looking at it.
다른 그 강간이에는 다 레드와스 되는 롱세는 맞지래 예스는 타이바지자 다 대소는 돈을 땐데 가리나 다 배도 쳐가지래.
And in terms of that happiness and safety, of course, my happiness and safety is important, but I'm just one being, whereas all sentient beings are countless sentient beings. So I need to also be thinking a little bit about them because like there's a lot more of them than there is of me. So that could be another way to think about it. Yeah. So it's not such an easy practice. Geshe said there can be obstacles, but there's different kind of ways to get to that point where we equalize and exchange self and others. And so we can try like different methods and see like which one of these works for me, which one of these is good for my circumstances.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dekli. Thanks so much.
So in general, I'm hearing circumambulate the self-introspection of, I hate my cancer, but I love this, and go broader to a more simplified question.
Yeah, what I heard, and I'll check this with Geshe, but what I heard is, because if you circumvent that noise and just say like, do you want to be comfortable? Do you want to be safe? Do you want to be happy? I think Geshe is saying, even if you have a negative self-image or whatever, you're still going to acknowledge that you want those things, right? Nga debo gogidus, nga kibo gogidus, so gitawa duksha yunayang, datong debo gogidus, kibo gogidus, so wachik lagire to us. Yes, so Geshe said that wish for safety and happiness is there, even without kind of that other conversation.
Yeah, got it. Thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Okay, so hey, Rebecca, can I ask a couple of questions that have been coming in through the chat?
Sure, of course.
Okay,
sure.
Yeah. So we had one from Carol that say, can Geshe please explain why Buddhas don't have Buddha nature? So what is the nature of Buddha nature then? Thank you.
Nganso numa Geshe di sangye nam sangye girik yomares. Tene di demba ina kare chene res chikche ane sangye girik ngo kandes tavo chikres.
Yeah, dembo. Oh yeah, sonji ris na. Sonji ris na. Sonji la tanda sonji cha me ba che. Kale ko jawano ne sonji cha thaya ga chala chi la. Sonji ris.
So Buddha nature can mean that for a being who has not become a Buddha, that potential inside them that allows them to change towards a Buddha. That's one way of understanding Buddha nature. So that's the measure of Buddha nature. So the self has Buddha nature, the mind has Buddha nature, and so forth. not res, yores,
Yes.
Ale, right? Oh, right. Sorry. So just checking something. So the I is Buddha nature. The mind is Buddha nature. You could also say it like this. But if we look at it, it's really these qualities of love, compassion, and so forth that are functioning as the Buddha nature. Yeah. So then when we are Buddhified, when we reach a Buddhahood, there is still that sense of self and mind, but the self and mind are no longer Buddha nature because they're Buddhified, they're Buddha. So Tara's I and mind are Buddha, but they are not Buddha nature. The teacher Shakyamuni's mind and I are Buddha, but they are not Buddha nature. Yeah. Why are they not Buddha nature? Because they're already a Buddha. There's no potential or nature that they need to become Buddha. They've already done it.
So it's like the when the apple sprouts from the seed is destroyed.
Erna kushu gishin roa sabane yongna shingyana dene sabandi mejo gituas. Correct, like that. He said not an exact match, but definitely in the right direction. That's a good way to think about it. Yeah, it's almost more like the potential became the Buddha, and because it became something else, it's no longer a potential. So in that way, yes, it's similar.
Yeah. Okay.
So Geshe said one definition of Buddha nature is that which allows one to go towards Buddhahood. That which allows one to go towards Buddhahood. Once you've reached the destination, right, you no longer have that which got you there, right?
Right.
Yeah. And also remember, when we talk about Buddha nature, we talk about its two aspects, right? The naturally abiding lineage and the developmental lineage. So when we talk about the natural abiding lineage, this has to do with the mind's emptiness. And the developmental lineage are those wholesome minds, which kind of help us reach that state of Buddhahood. Yeah, so the virtuous or the wholesome minds which bring us closer to Buddhahood. Developmental lineage. Yeah, so you'll find a full explanation of the naturally abiding and the developmental lineage in the Uttara Tantra Shastra, in the texts on the Buddha nature or the Tathagata essence.
So I haven't counted taking over this question because it wasn't mine originally, but I don't see how either the natural or the developmental aspects of Tathagata Garbha are exhausted by the resulting.
Not exhausted, transformed into
transformed.
Gyur means literally change. Sorry, Dave, I'm now jumping in. But gyur literally means developmental. We say this was also my point with like devotion. That to me does not really convey rely. It's the same in the case of this word. Gyur girik means gyur means to become something. When you say developmental lineage, it doesn't give that same sense strongly. Yeah.
Still, if natural Tathagata Garbha is the emptiness of the mind, does that mean that if a Buddha doesn't have Tathagata Garbha, they no longer have emptiness?
Yeah, that's a good question. Rangjin nerik di roasena semgi tompani di. Dene sange rangjin nerik mena dene koronso sem tompani yomares di dapo kogere pesa. So the Buddha's mind is empty, but it is not that it is not that naturally abiding lineage. So the mind's still empty, but we just can't call it a naturally abiding lineage. Is that unsatisfying? To me, it makes sense. If it's unsatisfying, tell us why. Then we'll try to unravel it more. Do you see any difference in the emptiness of an ordinary being's mind and the emptiness of a Buddha's mind, or is it the same emptiness?
I would say it'd have to be the same emptiness.
Chikparesa.
Yes,
correct. Yeah. So we just call it the naturally abiding lineage. We call the emptiness of our mind the naturally abiding lineage when we're a sentient being, but we don't call it the naturally abiding lineage when you're a Buddha. But it's still the emptiness of the mind.
Even though the nature of it is identical, we give it a different label.
Because there's no speak of something being a potential when you're a Buddha. You've fully reached, you've realized all of your potentials. So why would you need to speak of a potential anymore? You've completely eradicated all the adventitious defilements. So why is a Buddha worried anything to do about potentialities?
But aren't we talking about the developmental side when you talk about having developed or completed something? The natural is...
No, they're both Buddha nature, though. They're both Buddha nature.
Anyway, okay. Let's move on to the next question.
No, tell me, why do you see them as not? Why is the okay, if they're both Buddha nature, how is the naturally abiding lineage different from the developmental lineage? Like what's the qualm here? I think I'm not identifying your qualm, which is maybe why you're not getting an answer.
So emptiness is something that doesn't change between being a sentient being and a Buddha. They're indistinguishable, they're identical.
Right.
So then why would you give them a different label? Because the basis is the same.
Okay. Ji chikpayena sangye semgi tompani dang semchen semgi tompani ji chikpayena konso mingmendrawa kandis Geshe said he already explained this because it's a potential. The emptiness is a potential that needs to be realized in a sentient being. It's not a potential that needs to be realized in a Buddha.
The emptiness is an object. So it doesn't have to be, it's not a potential. It is.
No, but that's the word naturally abiding lineage, rik, rakiku rigasa rik is potential.
Okay.
That's literally what lineage means.
So it's not really talking about emptiness, it's talking about a potential.
The Geshe said that why would you talk about activating a lineage then? And then once you activate the lineage is no longer more there.
Okay, so we're not actually talking about emptiness, we're talking about a potential.
Rangjin nerik labdi dene tompani rang mares nupa dapo chikres rik dapo chikres tompani rang maresa. Yeah, so semgi tompani res.
Yeah.
It's no, that's not right. So it is the emptiness of the mind. It's just that when we're a sentient being, we call it the naturally abiding lineage. And when we're a Buddha, we no longer call it that. I don't understand I'm not getting what your point is, to be honest.
That's fine.
Okay.
Let's not belabor the name for this.
Okay. So, no, I like to try to get people answers, but I'm not sure. Like it's Nganso. Let me ask it in this way. Nganso semshin yimpe kaplola semgi tompanidi nupares. Nganso sangye yimpe kapala sengi Right. Tapares. Dene tapa in the sangye ne karechene medrogires. Dene konam gimsen yere.
Maybe that teach you to match. Nipa sekete shesa yo amares. Tapares the motepela.
Yeah. Yeah. So the emptiness of the mind is something that is permanent. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
The emptiness itself is permanent.
Doesn't change.
de gyowa mepasa. So then if we speak about the emptiness of the mind, if we just use that word emptiness of the mind, you wouldn't have any sort of sense that this is some sort of potential or some sort of seed or some sort of thing that needs to be actualized or activated, right?
That's my point.
Yeah. But there is a person whose mind is empty. Would you agree with that?
But this is...
Yeah. Yeah. So then when that person becomes a Buddha, that ordinary being whose mind was empty is no longer there. So although the emptiness is there, the kind of object upon which it's identified is different. So you speak about it using different language.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
So you can't speak of a Buddha having Buddha nature. You can't speak about a Buddha having the nature of liberation. You can't speak about a Buddha having the nature of bodhicitta.
So what I understand, when we're talking about Buddha nature, then we're talking about the object possessor, not the object, when talked about emptiness.
Sorry, say again, Dave.
So when we talk about Buddha nature being empty, so it's natural Buddha nature, we're talking about the object possessor rather than the object.
Dene nganso the sangye gi rik labdu nganso yulchen so dapuchik res nganso yul so la gyomare ro tompani yana yulchen so gi kepares yul gi kepa mares
me ta tenda tekke cha mares yedo ike cha yo mare koro sunji sal ro chawa do ma chawa deta gla
res di yulchen res ro yeah this also kyo yulchen res also kyo sengi tompani
mes koro chalo koro sunji yido ma ita gares.
Yeah, di korongi chua drogyo mari.
Da nie de so ke Japan ye ma de. Tumbani do sedo sei na ije ke ya ma res. Chala koro sonji yido mai da re tenda.
Chala koro sana?
Tumbani ne re ngai ne re li ne re. Sonji yido mai.
Oh, peko tonsum tanda. So semgi tompani di tompani res. Tompani gyowa drogi res, kangsa di gyowa drogi res.
Shikari ina yo.
Yeah.
Koro sonji yido mai.
Yeah. So any phenomena that we can speak of, whether it is ordinary or whether it is a Buddha, this is the first delineation that we need to pay attention to. And if it is not a Buddha, is that facet something that can become a Buddha or not? If it is, then we can say it's a rik, a nature or a potential. Nature is once again a really bad translation of rik. I have no idea how we got there, but it's above my pay grade. But anyway, that's what it means. That's what it means. So saying that, like, we can't just say I don't like it, but it's just we speak about the emptiness of the mind in one way when we're speaking about a first sentient being, and in another way when we're speaking about a Buddha.
That's fine.
That's all it is.
I get it. Totally get it. It's mind.
Yeah. Semre. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I think it's a good question, Dave. I'm just not sure if we can get the precision that you want.
No. I get it. I'm sorry for the lengthy, because we do have a couple of other questions.
No, this is also because of Kedrip. He always wants to get the answer right instead of letting go. Yeah. Yeah, so this whole conversation was to determine whether something is a potential or not and how that changes the language. But I said to Geshe, there's a lot of other people waiting. We don't realize that. But
no, I get it.
Because we don't see. So we'll get to the other questions. Yeah, thanks, Dave.
I get it.
We can come back to it though.
It's resolved.
It's resolved. Yeah. Okay, awesome.
So Charmaine is asking with regard to reliance on the guru. When a student may have more than one guru who is impactful on the student's mind, for example, one lives with the teacher and yet another teacher who visits occasionally. So can Geshe elaborate about reliance on the guru?
Chenyen tensu drodu de nganso di tsawilama tso dapo chikyore nganso tanyesha chichena kampa chik dang nyamdu dapo chik degire duasro namgyun tuyagi lama chikyore. Di soso semla pentokyori in a young kudrun gilama chikra, nakeup gilama samsam yong yadi young semla alkande salgore nupa chambo chikyore dinso shenyen tenso niga shenyen tenso kandestro gre.
머르 다때 소소 세게 디니 타나라 맞때 차나 가제타 짜치가 가서요 된 노지 따토야 타라와자 가라와스 모두 로토도 이거 말아.
So Geshe said that in fact it doesn't really matter like kind of how often we see a particular lama or don't see another one, or whether one is kind of like the resident lama and the other is a lama who just maybe comes on tour sometimes. The principle is the lama for whom we have that kind of strongest feeling of reliance, we try to extend that same strong feeling of reliance to all of our teachers. That's the principle here. And you know, of course, you know, that's something to work towards, because of course we're a human being and we have different relationships with these different teachers, but that's the underlying principle.
Okay. Yep. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Well, this is a very strange question. Okay, so we were talking about mindfulness and anger. What if a monk or a nun goes to Bailakupe with a enlightened being like the Buddha, and that's where they were trained, and they see a mob of Hindus tearing down the monastery and trying to burn it down? Okay, how do they respond? How would the Buddha respond? How would the monks and nuns respond? Now, I realize that that's a horrible question, but that's literally the way most people feel about what's going on in America. So if you think that's unkind, you can ask it in a different way.
It's a hypothetical, I think it's an absolutely fair question, Rebecca. I'm just always like very aware that people are so sensitive. So whichever religion you put as the people that are burning it down, whether it's Hindu, Muslim, Christian, or whatever, so those people are going to be offended. So we can just say people of another religion, maybe.
A mob of other people. Yes.
No, it's good. It's a hypothetical question, but you know, these days yeah.
Well, it may not be hypothetical, and unfortunately, someday.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I got you though. I got the principle. Nanso mi dang soso chapa dang ani soso keo yana. Then soso sangye dang nyamdu baila kupe drona. Then baila kupe choluk jendak chik gumpa denso chatsanwa mepa soya tavche chegi yeres. Konso gumpa denso nepa kea tavche chegi yeres. Soso sem nanglola kande samlo tangores. Sangye yena korong tuki nanglola di kola kande samlo tangiresa.
Sunji yina.
Sangye yena ane soso keo yena roa. Sangye ko rangjingi yaksha dabo chik redua. Tene yang soso keo yena kande dabo chik samlo tangiresa.
Majena de sega roa.
Yeah. Sangye dang yamdu drogen. Mare. Mi ni dua gompa mepa soya tagen. Chik sangye re chik soso keo gi chapa dang anire. Sangye ko gompa mepa soya tona ko di dabo chik sigire duas. Soso keo yena koron so di dabo chik sigire duas.
Sunji yina gema meva so kiwa marwas.
Mare konsu paropo denso roa. Choluk jendak chik tongire. Choluk jendak chik gompa mepa sogire. Sangye dang soso keo konsu di tagire duas taring pone. Sangye gisemla kande shongire. Soso keo gisem kande samlo tangire tikola.
다 대도 온다 문제라was 다 손지에는 다그 타요는 다 베제도를 다 매나 다 이지셔도 다
So from the Buddha's perspective, when the Buddha is seeing this, of course, they have an uncompromising compassion. So they view the people that are doing that with compassion. And on the practical side, if the Buddha is able to do something, if through his clairvoyance he sees that he can intervene and stop this, he will. But if he cannot, he just holds those beings with a mind of compassion.
다 소소시 원래 다 소소 보게 제 도와요 매긴요 제 도와요 매 다야 뭐 보여 하네스 쇼마도 니지시 도교요 주어래 다요 대신 못하는 단 노지적이고 이거를 남는 거
And in terms of the monk or nun that's with the Buddha, right, how he or she is going to see it, this really depends upon their own personal practice and level of realization, right? So even if they're an ordinary being, if they have quite a high level of cultivation, they might be able to hold those beings with compassion. But if their practice is not so developed, then they're probably going to view the people that are damaging the monastery as enemies, right? With a mind of aversion. That would be kind of like a human reaction.
야 로카시타 로카세 노스지게라 손지 때문에 끝나 침보되는 뭐 뭐지 소스 이디갈 뭐지 다 니지 시에요 아래
Right.
각기 고로사게요.
So this actually did happen, except it was in Afghanistan recently, where there were many images of the Buddha that were blown up, and you could see how different Buddhists reacted to that, right? There was a sadness, but some had a sadness, but also compassion for the people that did that. Other people reacted with a mind of real anger. So that depends upon like their own level of cultivation, right?
다 그게 열레체 도 메스는 분들 리라보도 말아봐서 군도세아들 고로지 군도레게 뭐 보여 할때니 아레스.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a tough one, right? And how the individual person reacts is just going to depend upon the sophistication of their practice, right? But in a way, the natural kind of human reaction would be for them to anger, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so it depends on the person.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks so much. I'm not sure who was next, Dave. I see a couple of hands.
So B, and then we have another from social media, and then Laura.
Dave, let the social media one go first.
Okay. So question from Ladan is, how can something negative be transformed into a cause for enlightenment, such as illness and pain?
Nanso netsu duksha chik jangshub lebya gitak kandes gyorwa tangures roa ngachana di barche lamdu kyorwa karna soso nepa yimpe kapula soso dungen yompe kapula.
어다데 남만 리라보 말와스 강에 다 강에 치주 뭐 보여 줘서와 아 야쇼테 된다 니가 소소가 될랭이 봐 요조다 뭐 대성도 되나 와스 아까 손랭이 간디치는 저 강가 니가 다봐
So the first way, and this is not an easy thing to do to transform it into the path to enlightenment, but the first way that we can think about it is this sort of illness that I'm experiencing, and it depends on the severity too, how doable this is, right? This illness that I am experiencing, it is the result of negative karma that I have accumulated. And as I am experiencing it, the karma leading to this result is being purified. So that's one way to think about it. And then you build out from that. So you think, as I am experiencing this illness and suffering now, and the causes that are being purified, may all sentient beings who have accumulated the causes to experience this same suffering, through my experiencing it, may those causes be purified, and may they be free from having to encounter that suffering, right? So this is kind of like one way to think about it. So this can be something that's very helpful, especially when we're trying to transform illness in particular. And kind of using that as like sort of the jumping off point, if we can eventually really practice Tonglen, right? Taking and giving meditation using our illness, that is really, really powerful. And it might be easier as a beginner, just like when we're experiencing those difficulties, to think, me experiencing this suffering is purifying its causes of negative karma. Me experiencing this suffering, let me just try to use this as a way to like release a little bit the grip of my self-cherishing, right? There's kind of different ways to approach it like that. Because with the taking and giving, right? Like when you're experiencing that problem, you also imagine you're receiving the problems of all the other sentient beings and purifying that for them. So that can be kind of overwhelming. So these are kind of small steps to lead up to that. Yeah, so you know, we can just see, like, you know, study and familiarize yourselves with different methods and see which one is kind of right for you at the point you're at. Sorry, I heard, did I miss a question? I heard.
No, some background.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah. So this whole kind of principle is known as taking obstacles, taking difficult conditions into the path. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Geshe asked, have we covered everything?
No, we have got two more questions from B and from Laura.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I got into a discussion with a fellow Dharma student the other day on this. It's a bit technical. So in Lama Tsongkhapa's system, we talk about merely label. So there's a merely label I or the merely label table.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, can ordinary being perceive the merely label I or merely label table?
Let me go back just B to make sure I heard you, because your voice is a bit faint today. So can an ordinary being perceive the merely labeled I or the merely labeled table?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of part one. Part two, we then got into argument that if ordinary being were to perceive anything that's a merely label, can it be a direct mind or it has to be a conceptual mind, because the merely label is a conceptual process.
Okay, I think I got it. Nganso Lama Tsongkhapa je rinpoche gi tawadi nganso taksam gi tsik peshatangi dua taksam gi dak taksam gi kukja dan dinso dapo chik yeres roa dene di kola triwa nidu tambo chik soso keo taksam gi neso chik tong tugi ye dan mes di triwa tambo di triwa nipa di sena nganso taksam gi neso chik tongna tak taksam gi neso chik tongdu di kadine tokpesem yingore samsam ngunsum gisem yinchogeres taksam gi neso yena
말은 따져 내서 통계 대라도 내서 요하는 왔어.
ngunsum yores.
따져.
Right.
따져 걸어 통계세 그거다. 걸어 열리지 아니라.
Yeah.
아니 대 통계
ngunsum dan tokpa niga yores. So Geshe is answering the second question first, B, which soso keo yenayang. So he wants to start with generally. So generally, a direct cognition of something, as well as a conceptual cognition, or conceptual apprehension, that's a better word, conceptual apprehension of something. You can have both of these with regards to merely labeled so-and-so. And also, the flavor of this conversation has to be informed by the understanding that this view of things being merely labeled, it is not the final expression of the ultimate view, in the sense that the Majjhimika Sautantrikas, as well as the Prasangikas, speak about things being merely labeled. So that's also important to keep in mind. Yeah. So what the Prasangikas say is that a conceptual mind will impute a mere label onto something. they speak about it using that language. The Madhyamika Sautantrikas don't use that kind of language. Ale. Younger Sunangone Kale Kale. Patak Samsana? Taksam, yep. Yeah. Taksamgi Tokpadi. Yeah. So an ordinary being can perceive the mere labeledness. Sometimes I don't know how to like put the grammar on these concepts, but hopefully you'll follow me. The mere labeledness of that object, right? Of that person or the chair or whatever. Listen. Yeah, Kotriwa DJ. Soso Kyodi. But they cannot have a direct, valid cognition of its mere labeledness. An ordinary being cannot. Does that answer your question, B? Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, this a lot of technical, very subtle distinction involved here. So when you say ordinary being can perceive mere labeledness of object, the perceive here, you mean conceptual.
Yeah, then it soso kyo yul taksamgi netsodi konso tongya di tokpe semres. Correct, B, yes.
So a conceptual understanding. Just like right now, I can have a conceptual understanding of emptiness.
Tandanga tompa nikola tokpe sem chik yong tugire soso kyo yena. Correct. Yes, yes. In a soso kyo ngunsum di yomares.
But we cannot have
but an ordinary being cannot have a direct cognition. And I'll say the Sanskrit because maybe that will help you. Like they won't have like a pramana, right? A direct, valid cognition of the mere labeledness. Yeah. Because, and the reason is this, if you have a direct realization of the mere labeledness of something, you have to have a direct realization of emptiness. So that's only available to an Arya being.
Actually, that was what I originally said to the other student.
Yeah.
But then she got me thinking, if merely label is a conceptual process, how can it ever be directly perceived?
Taksamgi netsudi tokpe sem rebes. Taksamgi netsudi tokpe sem yena, dene taksam ngunsum kandeshik yongiresa. Yeah. So the labeler is conceptual, correct? Takpadi? Tak chikpodi? Yeah. Because there has to be a subject doing that, right? The labeling is not coming from the side of the object, obviously, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the mind doing the label is always conceptual. So how does a direct perception come in to that label that is conceptual?
Yeah, I see. Sorry, I want to stop, Geshe, just because I understood what you said, so I don't want him to go and then I forget what you said and then I'll get confused. So I'm just going to relate to him what you said. Tak samgi netsudi tokpe sem yinsang, nanso tokpa yinsang, nanso tokpa ngunsum kandeshik yongires. Ah. Yeah. So the point here is that conceptual apprehension of the mere labeledness of something, if we meditate and meditate and meditate and meditate and meditate how things are merely labeled, eventually we'll come to a direct realization of mere labeledness. So it's like, it's happening in stages.
Maybe another way to ask it is that the label is come about through a conceptual process.
Sorry, so the label comes about through a
Through a
conceptual process. Yeah.
So how how can that ever be direct? Because that's how it arrives.
Takdi tokpa la tene yongires. Tokpe sem mena takdi yongi omares. Tokpe sem la tene chungpa indutsane. Ngunsum kandes rogires.
말하면 코로 뒤뚜바디 깨자 말했어. 이 가래기는 뚜비 파도 좀 지레디가 왔어.
Yes.
대 뚜바지가 뭐 통용 그랬어.
Yes. Yeah.
뚜바지.
Right.
뚜바지가 통소나 나디 뚜바디 용용소는 또 내라 뚜비도 좀대 시르시른 로소나 야르야른 로소나 뚜바딩에서 저도 왔어.
말에 디모랑기 추어 말에 탁바디 탁 잠기네줄디 톡페 셈라 테네 충어레스 톡페 셈라 용파 인두산에 톡페 셈 라테네 충야기네조치 문숨 간데스 용기레스 추어디레
메따저 코롱에서 저도 그래서 그러면 왔어. 따저 코로
Yeah.
사모지레도 예레도 왔어.
Right. Okay.
다 코로 뚜바지한다 지금 통으로 그러와.
So Geshe said that although it's a conceptual mind that labeled the object, the mere labeledness itself is still an object, right? So it's still an object, it's not a mind, and so therefore there can be a direct realization or apprehension of it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Taksamgi, yeah. Right. Right. I think we're splitting hairs at this point, B.
Yeah. As I say, it's a very subtle distinction. Thank you so much.
Yeah. If you want to follow up, because I think I'm just not sure how to get you the answer you're looking for, but I do understand what your qualm is. How can something that is by its nature conceptual have a pramana, have a direct realization of it? That's what you're asking, right?
Yeah. But there are many tangent aspects to these questions, but it's for another time.
Yeah, no, thank you for your patience. I'm sorry we couldn't get you the precision. Yep. Yeah. So what Geshe is saying is that there is a merely labeled object, and that is conceptual. And then there is a conceptual mind that is conceptualizing that merely labeled object. Loso. Yeah. Yeah. Then that conceptual mind apprehending that merely labeled object through familiarization and through our effort becomes a mind that is directly realizing that merely labeled conceptual object. So that's his answer. I don't know if that gets you where you want to go, B, but that's his final summation.
Just to clarify that I got you right, you say the first sentence was the merely labeled object is conceptual.
Yeah. Tak samgi yuldi tokpe yul res labtugires.
Yeah,
correct. Yes.
And then the second step is that there's a conceptual mind conceptualizing it.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Yes. Right. Or maybe we could say conceptual mind apprehending that merely labeled conceptual object. That's maybe better to say apprehending. Less confusing.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Dave, is there anything else? Or did we
cover? Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you again, Geshe. My question is regarding the compassion for all pervasive suffering. So since all Buddha's teachings actually talking about this type of pervasive suffering, not the first two, like of change or suffering of suffering, can Geshe please explain how to develop that type of compassion, and is it type of ultimate compassion that all pervasive, suffering, compassion directed to that type of suffering, because it involves more like renunciation of samsara, understanding our nature of suffering, who we are, how we have been come to this world out of afflictions and delusions, all that stuff, to actually get to the point to know that we're suffering in that way. But then we have to
now you've lost me, Laura. Now it's gotten a bit so I understood like the first part until you got to this part about knowing that we're suffering in samsara. And so like, are you just asking that compassion?
how to develop that compassion, because that type of suffering, it's difficult to recognize. And this is the actual compassion that we should have.
Yeah, okay.
The other two are not so significant because the other two type of suffering, they are like very like impermanent, they come and go, but this suffering will stay. So that's my question, you know, like what type of compassion is that and how to develop it?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. Nganso ninja seriati nganso di dunya sumyore dunya gi dunya gyurwe dunya kyaba duchi gi dunya idane the ninja ngene di kyaba duchi gi dunya latene yongi yores tene a kyaba duchi gi dunya latene ninja kia di nganso kyaba duchi gi dunya kandes droge yores di hakogres di migi neso chatsama kyaba drogires aneso kari na kibu na dukja na di kyaba duchi gi dunya res di hakogres ninja kyaba duchi gi dunya ninja ngene kia res di gogiribes.
야, 니지 제목이네 시한테 그거 잘했어.
Yeah.
미미 다때 미 대전다 계자 말다스. 자반 대제게 동아서 레도 녀문이 그게 오늘 dio 자리네. 아까서와 그 가디에나 콜
So yes, you have to be able to kind of understand how that all-pervasive or compounded suffering is functioning to bring forth great compassion. Remember, the text was talking about the measure of great compassion, right? So to bring forth that great compassion. But Geshe said that you can simplify the way that you're thinking about it, just that when we speak about all-pervasive suffering, this is pervasive because beings are under the control of karma and affliction. So if you understand beings are under the control of karma and affliction, therefore suffering pervades their experience, and develop compassion in this way, that's a good kind of line of thought. Yeah. And really, we're not talking about compassion here. We're really talking about the realization of great compassion, which is quite a big thing. So that's where this comes in. So to meditate on compassion, generally, you don't need this kind of deep comprehension of all pervasive suffering and all of the reasonings behind it, right? But to reach that level of great compassion, you do.
Thank you so much. That answers my question. Actually, I was looking for that type of reasoning and what I should do actually to get there. Thank you so much.
All right. I think we are at the end now.
That is it.
We are. Okay. I think Geshe needs the loo. That's fine. Yeah. So Geshe said, thank you very much, everybody. We're going to end it here. Don't forget, we pick this up again next Sunday if you're free. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe. Thank you.
Take care, Laura, Pivy, Rebecca, Dave. Take care, everybody.